killing for their organs. It may sound hard to believe, but experts and lawmakers are pointing to mounting evidence that the Chinese Communist Party is indeed committing a crime against humanity. But why isn't it more widely known?
My scalp finds its way cutting his skin. Blood can be seen. It implies that his heart was still pumping blood, and his body was struggling. He was alive.
That's Chinese surgeon Enver Tohti recalling to lawmakers his former role in China's lucrative practice of harvesting organs from prisoners of conscience.
Thus, we see religious dissidents targeted for harvesting. First and foremost, the Falun Gong.
A House panel on Thursday examined evidence pointing to a large-scale state-sanctioned practice of forced organ harvesting in China. Matthew Robertson, who co-authored a recent research report, said his team analyzed hundreds of Chinese medical papers and found 71 cases in which organs were removed from living donors.
The papers appear to show that the donors, who were prisoners, were alive at the time of the surgery and were killed by the transplant surgeons in the process of heart extraction.
And the unusually short waiting time for organ transplants in China points to the same conclusion.
Waiting times were advertised in weeks and days, suggesting that a pool of blood-type donors was available for execution and organ harvesting on demand.
Beijing claimed that their organs come from voluntary donors. But a London-based People's Tribunal in 2019 concluded that China continues to forcibly harvest organs on a large scale, with Falun Gong practitioners being the main target.
And we tested both the factual evidence and then the legal factual conclusions on the strictest basis, proof beyond reasonable doubt.
However,
This terrible, terrible abuse. Why the silence?
a former Assistant Secretary of State said Beijing is using its economic influence to force many to stay silent, even within the U.S. government.
But our intelligence community needs to be all over this, and they're not. And it's politically incorrect to raise these questions. There's way too much money involved.
Meanwhile, lawmakers are pushing to pass bipartisan legislation to stop forced organ harvesting in China.
And much more needs to be done, and the fight must go on.
The bill would sanction those taking part in organ harvesting and require the Department of State to report on those practices.
The Chinese regime is tightening the country's border under the zero-COVID policy. Some Chinese citizens even had their passports cut up at border entries. Let's take a look.
China's National Immigration Administration announced last Thursday it will strictly follow Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping's zero COVID-19 policy in its border control operations. That applies to both those entering and exiting the country. The agency says it will conduct stricter screenings before allowing those going abroad for study, work, or business from leaving China. Chinese internet users revealed that earlier this month, Chinese border agents interrogated every passenger on a flight before they were allowed to enter China. The border agents asked them in detail why they went abroad, what they did abroad, and why they returned to China. If their answers were deemed unsatisfactory, the border agents would cut up their passports, making them invalid, so the passengers had to stay in China. Some passengers had to promise that they would not go abroad in the future to avoid having their passports invalidated. A Chinese man who left the northern Chinese city of Dalian for Japan over a month ago tells NTD what he saw at the airport before his departure.
I saw passports being cut up when people came back to China. I saw over 20 passports being cut up at the border entry in Dalian alone. If you could get the documents to leave China, get them as soon as possible. If you can leave quickly. This country is now really in an unstable state. It's closing its doors, and the control is getting tighter and tighter.
Some agencies that support Chinese students who plan to study abroad say that the Chinese regime has stopped issuing passports for elementary and secondary school students who want to study abroad. China's immigration agency last week denied that it is suspending passports and invalidating foreign green cards. They say they are still providing services for Chinese citizens making necessary trips abroad. But earlier last week, China's immigration agency said it would restrict non-essential exits of Chinese citizens.
The U.S. needs to make real plans with China on an issue-by-issue basis. That's according to what a U.S. lobby group said on Tuesday. The American Chamber of Commerce in China, also known as AmCham China, says it opposes any outright decoupling effort between the U.S. and China. The group voiced that stance in its latest white paper, adding that the cost of decoupling would be huge and there would be no clear winner afterward. AmCham China is a non-profit organization. It has 4,000 members from 900 different companies across China. The organization strives to help American companies through advocacy and networking, boosting their chances at success in the country. Besides decoupling, the chamber also touched on other areas, like suggesting policy that would facilitate bilateral trading, something it called mutually beneficial. That's as concerns about China's economy and industry grow, as the country holds onto strict lockdowns and virus restrictions. AmCham China's president predicted that in the coming years, investment into China will most likely decline, and the chamber's chairman said China's business environment has become a lot less predictable. The chamber's latest survey appeared to back up those predictions. According to the poll conducted from late April to early May, over half of AmCham China's member companies have cut revenue projections for this year, and over 60% of them have suffered supply chain disruptions. One is dead and 5 others injured after a California shooting on Sunday. The attack happened inside a Taiwanese church, where a man opened fire in the building. Authorities say the shooter was angered by Chinese-Taiwanese tensions. The victim is being called a hero for charging at the shooter. One official says he sacrificed himself so that others could live. Jessica Beatty has more from NTD's News Today.
52-year-old Dr. John Chang tackled the shooter and attempted to disarm him, allowing others to intervene, according to officials.
Dr. Chang is a hero in this incident.
Dr. Chang was killed. 5 others were injured. The shooting happened during a lunch held by the Taiwanese Presbyterian Church in a retirement community in Laguna Woods. Dr. Chang was one of the youngest members.
Understanding that there was elderly everywhere and they couldn't get out of the premises because the doors had been chained, he took it upon himself to charge across the room and to do everything he could to disable the assailant.
The shooting suspect is identified as 68-year-old David Cho of Las Vegas. Officials say he's a U.S. citizen who grew up in Taiwan. The sheriff says the motive for the shooting was Cho's hatred toward Taiwan, which was documented in handwritten notes.
Was a politically motivated hate incident, a grievance that this individual had between himself and the Taiwanese community.
Cho's family apparently was among many forced to move from mainland China to Taiwan to flee the communist takeover. The sheriff said Cho was not well received in Taiwan. Cho's notes also suggest he believes Taiwan should be part of China, and he's part of a Las Vegas group that supports unification.
It is believed the suspect involved was upset about political tensions between China and Taiwan.
The AP reports that a former neighbor said Cho's life unraveled after his wife left him last year and moved to Taiwan. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen condemned the shooting on social media and sent condolences, saying violence is never the answer. Local Asian Americans in Orange County are shocked by the shooting.
There's a lot of Taiwanese Asian people around in Irvine and Laguna Hill. We have never heard hear anything happen like this.
Hate is gonna causing other hate, and have to stop.
One young Filipino American says his takeaway is you gotta be a good citizen to other people.
It's just very considerably shocking for something to happen to such a community, especially when violence is not really the norm. Keep being vigilant and just keep being compassionate to other people.
All the victims were of Asian heritage. The FBI said it's opening a hate crime investigation.
Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is no longer expected to screen in China. But even without a release in the country, Disney CEO says the company is pretty confident even without China. Let's zoom in on what's happening.
Doctor Strange 2 is the latest Marvel film banned from a release in China. Behind the cancellation, Disney CEO Bob Chapek stated the reason is very fluid and very complicated, both from a business standpoint and from a political standpoint. Home to the biggest fan base in Asia, China is considered a major market for films. But even though Disney might lose a significant source of revenue, the company seems unfazed and unlikely to make any changes to the Multiverse of Madness film to appease China. During the company's Q2 earnings conference call on Wednesday, Chapek responded to the apparent censorship. He revealed Disney is pretty confident that even without China, it doesn't really preclude our success given the relatively lower take rate that we get on the box office in China than we do across the rest of the world. Since its release on May 6th, Doctor Strange 2 has grossed around $507 million at the worldwide box office, even without a Chinese release. As for why Chinese theaters aren't playing the film, in both the trailer and a major scene of the film, a newsstand belonging to the Epoch Times newspaper is visible. The media company is known for its uncensored coverage of China. Beijing hasn't given a reason for canceling the film, but isn't expected to approve the submission. It is not the first time Marvel has been iced out of China. Since Spider-Man Far From Home came out in 2019, Marvel has faced difficulty getting movies approved there due to China's authoritarian censorship and strict demands over what is and what isn't allowed to appear on screen.